Well, hello there. It's David Baer here with Wine Conversations, and I'm really excited today to have as my guest James Halliday, or Jim Halliday, not to be confused with some of the other James Hallidays out there, particularly the notable wine critic in Australia, who. If that's who you tuned in to listen to today, sorry to disappoint you, but we have a great conversation and a great guest coming up. So, hey, Jim Halliday, thank you so much for joining me here on Wine Conversations.
My pleasure. It's always good to talk with you, David.
And I will say that you're one of the many famous Jim Hallidays or James Hallidays out there. I discovered a lightweight boxer, some politicians, and others along the way. But I have the one who I wanted to talk to, James C. Halliday, owner of Halliday Hill in Newberg, Oregon, a vineyard and a very tiny wine label as well. And we'll get into your story in a little bit. But one of the things that I really wanted to have you come on and chat about with us today was your what you are doing today and what led up to that. So, Jim, you are a vineyard owner in Oregon, and you also produce your own wine label. Why don't you talk a little bit about Halliday Hill, and then we'll do a little backtracking and talk about what got you there in the first place.
Okay. Yeah, Halliday Hill is a very tiny vineyard. It's only 1.5 acres. So we produce maybe, depends on the year, 4 to 8 barrels a year off of that vineyard, which we are very happy with. We like the quality of the wine. It's 100% Pinot Noir. We work with a wine company called Brick House. And Doug Tennell of Brick House is our winemaker. He does a wonderful job with our wine and his own wines at Brick House. And he farms the vineyard biodynamically and organically, so we're certified in both of those areas. And our involvement pretty much as a result is that we sort grapes, our grapes. We help sort his grapes too, and but Doug makes the wine for us. And then after it's been made, for example, just last week, we blended our 2013s.
Okay.
So here it is, 2015, and that it's been in the barrel now for 16, 17 months, something like that. And we just bottled that, and or we just blended that. And so Karen and I, my wife Karen, and I come over to Brick House, and we taste through the barrels, and we decide which barrels we like, which ones we really like, and we start noting those down, and then start adding bits and pieces of each barrel. We may pick, for example, this year there was one barrel that we absolutely loved, and we picked half of our blend was coming from that one barrel. And then we went through the other barrels and picked some others, and we go through this process 2 or 3 times until we finally decide what our blend is going to be. And then probably in another month or two, we will bottle that wine after the blend's been sitting there for a little while. And then we will release the wine maybe a year later.
So
If you were...
just for a point of reference, you said a really tiny vineyard and a really tiny label, and then you talked about barrels. I've seen your property. I know how much or how little fruit you actually have. How many barrels does that vineyard yield? And as a result, I mean, a barrel is typically how many cases of wine. So how much are you actually producing off of your property altogether?
Okay, so we produced in 2014, which was a huge vintage. We produced 8 barrels of
Okay.
wine, and you get about 25 cases, approximately, it's slightly less, per barrel.
Okay.
So the vineyard can produce, quite a bit. It's pretty good. That's 200
Yeah.
cases, right? Sometimes only 100. But Doug takes the part of the wine. We only blend 25 to 50 cases for Halliday Hill, and the rest of it goes to Brick House, and Doug blends it into one or more of
Of
his
his wines.
blends.
So Halliday Hill producing somewhere around 25 to 50 cases of wine is clearly not a lot of wine from year to year. What happens with that wine?
Well, we do sell it through restaurants,
Mm-hmm.
Painted Lady, Noble Rot.
Mm-hmm.
We
Yep.
try to work with painted with wineries and through wineries a little bit to get to know other people and most of our sales are just direct for to individuals who want to
Yeah.
buy a case here or a few bottles there.
And having been to your property, I'm pretty sure that I never have seen a tasting room, formal or informal. There's no commercial activity that I've noticed. I don't see a visitor parking lot or any of that. So you are really doing this on a very very small scale, and it's great that you're getting some wines that are coming right off of your property, going into some notable restaurants in the area. But clearly, this is a more of a I don't know, a small side business than an operation that is intended to be financing your lifestyle, I'm assuming.
Well, no, I mean, we try to make enough money off of the sales that we make to cover our
Right.
costs, but it's I don't know that we'll ever recover our full cost as far as putting in the vineyard and the cost of that and the maintenance. We work out because we've got kind of this agreement with Brickhouse,
Mm-hmm.
and they get part of the fruit for part of their work. And so, in some respects, the OLCC sees our vineyard as the 10th block of their vineyard.
Mm-hmm.
So so, and just for the extra work we do, and for the fact that it's on our land, we end up being able to take back 50 to or 25 to 50 cases.
So I guess my question was an indirect commentary on the fact that your current situation is what I think had intended to be a retirement for you, and from what you've explained here, it sounds like a pretty active retirement. But to backtrack, and then maybe we can interweave some of what you're currently doing. You've had a very successful career. In an industry that you were a big leader in, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. But you're a Renaissance man. You're a theater person. You're a classical music person. Clearly, you're a wine person. I'm curious to learn a little bit about how wine became such an interest and passion of yours. But eventually, you settled in Oregon as a sort of a retirement plan, and perhaps not the same type of retirement plan that people who are sunbirds who spend time in Florida or Arizona for their retirement. So it's a very very different retirement lifestyle than many I think consider. So let's backtrack a little bit and talk about how this all came about in the first place.
Well, when I was still working, I worked for a company called Humanware, which was a company that produced technology for blind people. And I used to visit this chiropractor in Pleasanton, California, who was interested in wine, and we talked about wine all the time. And he said, "Gee, I've got some property. You want to help put in a vineyard?" And so I was out in Knights and Brentwood area, which is sort of not quite Central Valley, but it's considered the Contra Costa AVA, and it's so we put in a Syrah vineyard out there, and it was really a lot of fun. I didn't know anything about it, and we planted and we picked and we produced through another winery. We sold the fruit to another winery, and it worked pretty well. It was kind of an interesting process. I didn't ever really get heavily involved. We made some wine under our own G&H label for a couple of years, and it was a lot of fun.
What sort of label is that?
It was Giesman and Halliday
Oh,
was
okay,
it was
okay.
a G and H
Yeah,
label.
got it.
It was it wasn't. We never really went through the full process as we have now. But it was a lot of fun, and it was nice to produce some wine, and I like Syrah a lot. But you know, it's interesting. The more and more I got into wine and tasting wine, I've been drinking wine for 20 years, I guess, or more at that point. Excuse me. But you know, and when I first got into wine, I liked bigger, more full-bodied wines. But as I drank more and more and experienced more and more types of wines, I realized that it's not all about size and not all about big alcohol and stuff like that. And I started to appreciate a little bit more finesse. I started getting more into Russian River Pinots and Pinots from Santa Rita Hills and places that I thought were a little bit more, had a little bit more finesse and were a little bit more interesting than the big, bold wines that we were getting. But I was back in Washington, D.C. at a friend's house, Pierre Ravani, and his dad sent Pierre down to the cellar for a bottle of wine. We'd had dinner, and we were having dinner, and it was a wonderful, wonderful meal, I remember. And he brought up this bottle of 1967 Burgundy. And
and I should say, for those of our audience who don't know who Pierre Ravani is, he's been a notable wine writer and wine critic, and his beat for a good stretch of time has been Burgundy. So he's actually somebody who knows Burgundy very well.
Yeah, and his dad knew Burgundy too. Well, when I tasted this wine, and a white or a red Burgundy is a Pinot Noir, basically. So when I talk about Pinot Noir, I'm usually not talking about something that was grown in Burgundy. If I'm talking about Burgundy, I'm talking about a Pinot Noir that was grown in Burgundy. Anyway, this wine just blew me away. It was that epiphany, the thing we always hear about. Wow, this was the wine.
Your aha wine, your aha moment sort of thing?
Yeah, it was like, wow, this is a Pinot Noir. And I thought, this is what Pinot Noir can be. And then when I came back from that, I started looking for Pinot that was grown in the New World, not just Pinot that was grown in Burgundy. Yeah. And I started to realize that the wines grown in the United States, the interesting Pinots were coming from Oregon, the ones that satisfied my palate anyway.
And what period of time was this?
This was probably maybe 10 years ago.
Okay. So Oregon really hadn't was just beginning to get noticed in a big way at that time. It really, wasn't on everybody's radar at that point.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. I was in a wine club for Pine Ridge, and every second shipment that they'd send, they'd throw in an Oregon Pinot because they'd started Archery Summit up here. Gary Andrews had come up and started Archery Summit, and so I thought, oh, that's pretty good. But then I went to a wine tasting at Mondavi's wine center down there, and they had 60 Oregon Pinot producers there, and so I started tasting through the Pinots, and to taste through 60 Pinots or 60 of anything is pretty difficult. Yeah. So I started, when I found one that I really liked, I asked the winemaker. Most of them were winemakers there, or people who were involved in the winemaking, and I asked them, well, if you were to pick 5 wineries, which 5 would you pick? And then they'd give me 5. And I'd go to those 5 first, and then each one of those people I'd ask which one I go to. Well, I didn't get very far, but I found a number and that I really loved, and I thought, wow. So Oregon is where Pinot is at. In California, I'd found a few that kind of would match that kind of quality, my definition of quality, in the Sonoma Coast area, the higher elevations, cooler growing areas in Anderson Valley, and those were areas that really kind of appealed to me. Um, and so then I thought, wow, as we got closer to retirement, where do we want to retire? I want to retire someplace where I could grow 100 vines of Pinot somewhere and just make a garage one. And and so Oregon was kind of an attraction. We came up here. There were a lot of things that were on our list that we needed to consider. I had to consider, um, you know, not only is there wine in the area, the kind of wine that I like, but are there great restaurants? Is there culture in the area? Is there a decent symphony orchestra in the area? Is there theater in the area? And all of those things were really critical, and we kind of were able to check those off. I wanted a beautiful place. I wanted a place I could walk and enjoy life and really just have a place that was peaceful and wonderful, but where I could get involved. Mm-hmm. And so then we came up on a trip in I think it was in March of '05, and absolutely fell in love with the place. It was and we'd always heard Oregon is rainy and rainy and rainy, and yeah, it rained while we were here, mm-hmm. but it was sunny too, and it was beautiful. And
sometimes
it was just
at the same
so
time,
neat.
it rains and is sunny. So.
That's right, all the time.
Yeah.
And then we came back about 6 weeks later for spring break, and found the place that we have right now, and bought it.
Mm-hmm. And you say and spring break because Karen is in education, or was working in education at that point. So.
Right, she was the president of a college down in California, and so she was ready to. Well, she wasn't really ready to retire. She could have stayed another few years, but it seemed like the right time to do it for me, because I was on my way in transition out, and I was ready to retire. So she joined me, and but she worked another 2 years as president beyond that. So we didn't actually move up here until 2007. Okay. But we ended up with a piece of property that was 4 acres. And so the bottom 2 acres had a Christmas tree farm, or what was kind of a dilapidated farm on it. And so we had them pull that out, and we put in a vineyard on those bottom 2 acres in November of '05. So that went in. That was the very first thing we put money into, was the vineyard.
So there were no vines on the property when you initially found it?
None. But I had mentioned Gary Andrus earlier. Gary Andrus had planted the Looney Vineyard, which is 35 feet from our house to the south, and so we're surrounded by vineyards, Brickhouse and Ayers and Araminta and Archery Summit's Looney Vineyard, and right across we look at Beaufrere across the way. So we're really surrounded by vineyards on almost all sides, really. And what a gorgeous place it is! It's just a glorious place.
I'm very jealous, because often you're also a great photographer. I left that off the list, and so occasionally you'll post something on Facebook or somewhere else of just oh, I woke up this morning and this is what I saw. I mean, it's just what a great position to be in. So
yeah. Well, and it is so perfect, because we're right on the ridge. Many mornings when it's foggy down in Newburgh, it's sunny up here on the ridge, and it's a great place. But it's the whole lifestyle for me has certainly taken on a hunk of wine, but also photography, as you mentioned. Theater is a big deal in my life. Music's a big deal, and the Cultural Center in Newburgh has become a huge part of our lives. And so we're extremely busy. We're nonstop, but we love everything we do. That's the thing. We don't ever feel like we're obliged to do something, or that we're worried about something that we we need to be doing. That's great.
I think I have friends who have gone off to one of those sunny, warm places because that's what they thought they were supposed to do. And more than once, I've heard stories of people who didn't last more than a few months because all you do is you hang around and you wait for the next meal and you go play golf every day. And clearly, you've found a much better way, something that fits your needs. You talked about how you prioritized. The place that you were going to be moving to next, what the things were that were important to you, and you were lucky enough to find that combination of places, all in this plot of land in Newburgh, and accessibility to so many wonderful things so close by. So that's great. This is a journey that a lot of people want to have in their lives. Perhaps they're an accomplished professional, as you have been, and maybe they've earned enough to invest in something, whether it's in or outside of the wine world. But there are plenty of people who just have a love or a passion for wine, and so they'll plop down a bunch of money on buying some land or starting up the newest cult winery in some hot California, hot as in chic, not hot as in warm, although it is often warm, hot California wine growing region, but then they actually get immersed into the world of what it is that they've gotten into, and the fantasy disappears and reality sets in. So I'm curious to hear about some of the reality that has set in with you.
Uh, well, with regard to the wine, obviously there's a cost there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you could afford to have a vineyard our size and farm it yourself. I mean, buying all the tractors and the sprayers and the time, just the sheer time that it would take to manage it. Some people could do that, but I think you couldn't have a 1.5 acre vineyard. You'd have to have a 20 acre vineyard if you even hope to have a business. We're fortunate in that we don't have to make that much money off of it. We're just trying to cover our costs, and so that's not. I mean, in a way, one respect, that's, I guess, a revolution. But the other thing, revelation, I should say. The other thing, though, is that the wine community in Oregon is just so wonderful. The people here, particularly up on Ribbon Ridge, are just so super. They've become close friends, and they really are very supportive of each other. And although they compete to sell their product, they're also really supportive of trying to promote Ribbon Ridge and our AVA here, but also the wines of Oregon in general. And people love wines here, and that's been something I've learned so much. When I was in California, I did take some classes at the college in wine, and went through probably half the program down there before we moved up here. But most of what I've learned about wine making itself has been by working with Brickhouse and just going through the whole process every year of the sorting and the distemming and the crushing and all of the various things, and we work closely with Trisatum as well, and Trisatum has been really great to work with because they make different varietals. They don't just make Pinot Noir. They've got a deal with Linetti, and they're bringing in some Bordeaux style grapes, and so they're making some of those. They're starting to make some sparkling wine now as well. They've started making Rieslings as well. Yeah, Riesling is such a huge thing of theirs. I mean, when I first tasted their Riesling, I was just knocked out. The best domestic Riesling I'd ever had. And So working with these various people have given us an opportunity to learn a lot more about wine, about the wine industry, about almost everybody here is a family-owned winery.
Mm-hmm.
Some have been around for a while, and some are relatively new. Um, I think you do have to have some money if you're going to um,
Well, there's
put in
that
a
great old
vineyard.
adage about how do you make a small fortune? Well, you start with a large fortune, sure. Yeah.
Exactly. It's hard.
Yeah.
And I think one of the ways some of the folks up here have done it, they've started with growing, just planting a vineyard, having enough, getting enough money together so they could plant the vineyard and selling those grapes, and then starting to make some of their own and gradually maybe taking more of those grapes for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll be interesting to see where it goes. But one great example of how wonderful people are, um, I was working over at Redmond Winery. Bill Redmond um, had died, and I was topping barrels over there for them, and we were starting to bottle. It was, I think, the 2007 vintage. So this was, I don't know when we were doing it, but I remember um, Bill had some big tanks of argon gas, and when you're sparging the bottles, you blow argon or nitrogen into the bottle, and then when you fill it with the actual wine, there's no air in the bottle. So even though it looks like there's air in the bottle, when you put the cork in top, you actually have nitrogen in there. So there's no actual air getting to the wine that can cause it to oxidize. Well, so we didn't have enough. We ran out. So I ran over to Aramenta Winery and talked to Ed over there and said, "Do you have any nitrogen?" And he said, "Oh, I have a small tank, but I don't think it's enough for what you need." So I took it back and we used that up. And then uh, by the time I had finished using that up, Ed called and said that he had talked to Brad over at Ayers, and Brad had a bigger tank, and they loaded. I drove over and they helped me load it in and brought it back, and we finished all the bottling then. But it was such a perfect example of jumping in and helping each other out, and that's such a typical thing that I wasn't really didn't even occur to me that. That the people here would be this great and that supportive of each other in a competitive environment, you know.
Well,
So
I think you've come from a very different place. If you look to small little European villages that have these sorts of generation old relationships between families who have been farmers for for multiple generations. Maybe they have great relationships. Maybe families have terrible relationships with each other, but you had come directly from California where it's this exists as well, but it's interspersed with a great deal of much more competitive, more commercial wine production, and so it's not necessarily what you might imagine exists if you're not really a part of a community like this. So I think that's a fabulous example of how well and how collaborative a community like that one, and you're talking about several different wineries that are within minutes of each other, right on top of a little hilltop. So you have to coexist, and you have to coexist well, because in the agricultural world, we're faced with things like people having different farming practices on neighboring lands, and somebody spraying something in their field, and the wind blows it over to some other field. That's not a great way to meet your neighbors. You don't have that sort of relationship with your neighbors. You have a very different one.
yeah, we're very fortunate. It is, and it's a concern, because we are certified organic and biodynamic. That we have to be very careful about who sprays what
Mm-hmm.
in the area,
Yeah.
and because the wind does pick up, and if you're near a grass farmer somewhere that has sprayed something you don't want on your vineyard,
Yeah.
can be a real problem. And
So
so,
you bring up the organic and biodynamic, and I want to ask you a little bit about that because first we'll go back to the origins of your story where you talked about Contra Costa, Syrah, and revelations about Pinot Noir, and then introduction to Burgundy, and then trying to find the beauty and simplicity of that here in the U.S. and you found it in Oregon. But you didn't really talk about philosophy behind the wines, really just what was in your glass. And I'm curious how organic and biodynamic came about. I know that it's very much at the center of what Brickhouse is about, but how did you get introduced to it, and why is your vineyard farmed the way it is?
well, we've always had a big garden, vegetable garden and flower garden and so on, and we've always tried to farm as organically as possible. And it's just part of the philosophy that we have is that things need to be done organically, and if they're not, that you're putting things into the soil that can leach into your water system, and people are going to be drinking that, and it's going to leach into something and go downhill to the lowest possible area and get into some drainage and go off to some other place that you just don't want poison in the ground. And we up here on the ridge, we're all very, we're dependent on the aquifer that's below us here, and we don't want to be dumping poison in there. I wasn't really very much aware of biodynamics. I'd heard some about it, but not very much to the point where I knew exactly what it was. And then when I started talking to Doug originally, let me backtrack a little bit. When we put the vineyard in, Bob Bailey, the guy who put it in for us, we told him we wanted to farm organically. Mm-hmm. And he said, okay. I think you should talk to Doug Tennell, who's right across the road, right? Because Doug farms his vineyard organically, and it's more expensive to farm organically because you have to go in there and cultivate it to get the weeds out and control things that way, rather than going in with Roundup or some horrible thing.
So it's a lot more manual as one example.
There's more manual labor. Okay. And then there was a biodynamic group that was getting together up here, not just on Ribbon Ridge, but in the whole wine area in Willamette Valley, and people would come to those meetings. And I hadn't moved up here yet, but I came up and started attending some of those meetings when I was in town, and I learned quite a bit about not just farming organically, but having other elements that you could spray that would help the whole organic quality of the soil, so that it would become more productive. That if you needed to increase the intensity of your flavors and so on, there's another spray that you can spray on that would help with the whole photosynthesis idea.
Natural compounds.
Absolutely, everything natural. And then, herbal type sprays, and the fact that having weeds around, some weeds are really important. Like dandelions are really great because they bring in, certain weeds bring in the right kinds of bugs and take care of the bad kinds of bugs. And so you really want to have a balance in your vineyard. And one of the things that made vineyards in Burgundy so special, I think, is that they have their own terroir, they have their own personality, which comes from the soil, but it also comes from the microclimate that's there, the aspect to the sun, the wind, all of those kinds of elements. And we have that same thing here. And I think we have the opportunity here as the roots go deeper and deeper into the soil to pick up different kind of minerality, to really start really showing a personality to your vineyard. I mean, and your vineyard might taste very different from the vineyard that's down the road, just because of various elements that are situated or that are related to your terroir. So anyway, those things are important to me, and the more I got involved with learning about those, the more I thought, well, you know, as I talked to Doug and he agreed that he would farm the vineyard, just made sense that we would go biodynamic as well.
Well, it's certainly something that I think, there's great wines that are made through biodynamic farming, and there's also terrible wines that are made through biodynamic farming, just like any farming approach. But what I think it does more than anything is it forces the people who are working the vineyard to pay far more attention to the detail of what's happening in the vineyard than they might otherwise, and I think that's on an operation of your scale, that's certainly doable. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm really convinced that farming organically, at least, is important just because you're so much more in touch with what's going on out there.
Mm-hmm.
You're really involved in the whole growth pattern and the health of the vineyard and the region, the area around the vineyard, and luckily, I mean, the people who farm around us are not certified necessarily, but they pretty much farm
Mm-hmm.
the same way we would.
That's great. So we're gonna wrap things up here in just a minute, but I'm just curious if now that you've been through this process, you're several years into it, just about 10 years from that visit that determined that you were going to commit to Oregon. What advice might you have for others out there who might want to follow a similar path and make the type of leap that you've made? What are the things that people should either look out for or be aware of going into it, and what are the big selling points that you want to make sure that they take advantage of?
Well, have some cash to start with. That, that's pretty important that you have a chunk of money to start with. I mean, down the road, you can figure out ways of bringing money back, but you have to have some cash to get things rolling. Um, and I think depending on how much you plan on investing or planting, you probably want some kind of relationship with um, either a vineyard manager or a neighbor who can farm the vineyard. In our case, the neighbor was perfect because he just drives across the road and has the same sprayer and the same cultivator and the same whatever and keeps going. And that really works well. So having some kind of partnership to work through, and in our case, being able to, um, in effect, pay for that with the juice that comes off the vineyard is very, very helpful, because that means there's not this ongoing drain. Now you could certainly sell the grapes, and we could now at this point we could probably sell our grapes for a reasonable amount.
Mm-hmm.
But we love the wine that Brickhouse makes, and we love our own label. We blend our own. It tastes a little different from Brickhouse, and we really like what we've got here. We love looking out on the vineyard and having that part of our view, and we love the people in the industry. They've all just been wonderful to us, and here we are, Californians moving in, and we've got this little thing and this little tiny vineyard that is nothing,
Mm-hmm.
and yet it produces great wine, and everybody's excited for us, and so that's another thing that you know there are a lot of benefits as well that you don't really realize. I think if you're going to do all the work yourself, you're going to have to love to be a farmer. I mean, love being a farmer, because there's a heck of a lot of work out there. But in our case, because Doug does all the work, or his
Or Doug's
crew,
team does it.
um, yeah, um, then that gives us time
Mm-hmm.
to be involved in the cultural center. It gives us time for concerts. It gives me time to, well, it gives us both time because my wife has started acting. I love it. So we can both be in shows, and we can be involved. When we first moved here, there was no local theater, and now there's Willamette Shakespeare, there's Valley Repertory Theater, there's Halliday's Row, all based right here in Newburgh, basically. And of course, there's a lot of great theater going on in Portland, but we're really excited because we've found ways of getting involved in the community to bring some of the things to the community that we want, and we haven't needed to do all the work to make that happen. We just are blessed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't. Life is the best years of my life have been the last 7 years since I've been up here.
That's great.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Well, it sounds like a fabulous, although probably not very quiet retirement that you're in, and I know that it's going to continue to bring you a great joy for a long time to come. So, Jim Halliday, thank you so much for giving us some of your time today and for sharing your story and your passion for wine and for life in general. And I hope that I know that you will have inspired somebody out there listening to pursue their own desires, their own dreams as well. So, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.